Hey guys, how you guys doing? Let's get into the Sunday news. Bear with me as I what's going on in the news world. Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Thank you for watching. And today's news, man, we're gonna go share what's going on in a week past and what's gonna happen in weeks to come. Let's share. So
Kote mwen wale, kote mwen Kounyan fini. Dwet pou kounyan. Kote sinte wala ti bola mte tire salade da pou. Mkou mfel kouvri. Ya met sos la.
Mete tout sos la net?
Mwen ti kal pou nou manje pita. Avec des messieurs avec
Oh, merci.
Voilà.
Yeah, I'm live, yeah. As we can see, what's going on in the news world today, man. Let's see what's going on so far. With Trump. So it looks like Canada is not too happy so far. What happened with Canada? Let's hear from
Washington correspondent with the Canadian Press. It is an independent news agency. Kelly, welcome. I'm curious what you're hearing about that meeting and the reason for Ford's apparent shift in tone. Are Canadian officials, are they holding their breath for April 2nd to see which tariffs Trump ultimately settles on?
Obviously, Ford came out of that meeting quite positive in how he was talking, bringing up a lot of the talking points of, families argue. But it was really clear that the meeting wasn't going to bring any change to Trump's plan to slap Canada with different levels of tariffs. What Canadian officials later said was they really sat down and went through Donald Trump's trade agenda that he signed January 20th, which is all these reports that are going to come out April 2nd about how to deal with trade around the world with these reciprocal tariffs. And it kind of took them through each part of that and how it would impact Canada. And so Canadian officials say, it's pretty clear that he remains committed to this tariff agenda. And there's obviously different levels of ones that are targeting Canada because you have the fentanyl related ones. And then the reciprocal tariff ones that are April 2nd, and then the ones that are currently on Canada, which is steel and aluminum. So I think Canadians are just looking for answers. That's kind of what officials in that meeting told me. And how they're walking out a bit more positive is at least now, after they were able to sit down with Jameson Greer, the new USTR, they're able to see a bit of the strategy while it felt like before they were just flailing.
I'm curious if Canadians, did they expect this tit for tat earlier this week? When Ford announced that 25% surcharge on electricity exports, Trump clapped back with the 50% tariffs, the ones you mentioned there on Canadian steel and aluminum, and declared a national electricity emergency. I mean, were they worried it would spiral out of control?
I think there was concern from different levels. There's been different kinds of responses. So we have a federal government response. Those are retaliatory tariffs that came into place after Trump first hit Canada with tariffs. And those are targeted to specific industries. So, Kentucky bourbon, things like that are trying to get a message across to specific states. Those were partially walked back. And then obviously the steel and aluminum were coming, and Ford said he was going to go ahead with this electricity surcharge to 3 American states. And they're, behind closed doors in different provinces, because he's a provincial leader, so he can make his own kind of choice about how a province will respond. I heard from other provincial leaders who were saying, this could escalate things, which is why maybe they aren't seeing the same thing across the country. I don't think anyone was surprised that it escalated things. And the question is whether Ford did that to get Trump's attention so he could get this meeting. That's some things that people are questioning in Canada.
And look, NBC reports that Trump's quest to conquer Canada, that's confusing everyone. Here's Trump this week in a response from Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney. Take a listen.
To be honest with you, Canada only works as a state. We don't need anything they have. As a state, it would be one of the great states anyway. This would be the most incredible country visual.
That's not true. That's not true. Besides our reserve, Canada is one of the most reliable oil people we buy to. So we buy, besides Saudi Arabia, we buy a lot of oil and gas from Canada. So I don't know what he's talking about. Besides, we don't need nothing else. We need oil from Canada. They have like sand oil where it go to a refinery in California, whatever it is, and they turn it back to oil and gas. So we need a lot of them, billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars of good that they purchase from us. Company that depend on us. So I don't know what he's talking about.
It's crazy. His point is crazy. That's it. We will never, ever, in any way, shape, or form, be part of the United States.
Give me a sense of just the big picture, how Canadians feel about Trump's 51st state rhetoric. I mean, are they clear why Trump keeps pushing this and what specific?
Another thing, what's far from frontiers? So let's talk about what was the other thing that happened today, GOPM to more this thing, attacking on drugs.
It just came out. There's a new website where any Florida resident, as long as you live within a zip code in the state, you can apply.
Minnie, as I mentioned, I was stunned just this week that mother, that woman in Louisiana who's facing felony charges for providing her daughter abortion medication that she got from a doctor in New York. I mean, she had to plead not guilty, but there's an extradition order from the governor of Louisiana sent to Kathy Hochul in New York saying, bring me the doctor too. I mean, is this just the start of what's to come under this administration?
Yeah, and this really started before this administration, right? But we had the Biden-Harris administration protecting these folks, and we've now seen, as you pointed out, the Trump administration withdrawing from the Idaho case, asking to intervene in a case against Planned Parenthood in South Carolina. I will just say again, thank God for Democratic governors like Kathy Hochul, who is pledged to do everything she can to protect Dr. Maggie Carpenter, who's frankly a hero in providing this care across states. We're seeing Democratic governors make sure they're passing shield laws or passing protections. They're stockpiling medication abortion. And this has been happening since Dobbs, but we had a federal government that was protecting us, and now we simply do not. So we can absolutely expect attacks to ratchet up when you have these red state governors and AGs who know they have a bunch of extremists in the administration at the DOJ, at HHS, at FDA, potentially CMS, who are going to do everything they can to be complicit in really restricting our abortion rights. And this flies in the face of what Trump campaigned on, which was no additional restrictions at the federal level, which we were obviously, pointing out was inaccurate and a lie. But a lot of Americans fell for that. So we have a job to do now, Katie, and it's to make sure everyone in this country knows what they're doing sneakily through rescinding executive actions in Biden era, policies is brought to light so folks understand what they're really doing.
Let's call out another Trump lie. I don't know anything about Project 2025. One of the key things of Project 2025 was eliminating a woman's ability to obtain an emergency abortion. Of course, now the Trump administration DOJ dropping a critical lawsuit that was brought to go against Idaho's abortion ban that the Supreme Court said in a narrow ruling, yes, the hospitals can provide an emergency abortion in that particular situation. I mean, so the fact that they've now dropped this suit, what does that mean, Minnie?
This is another way, and this is exactly what I was talking about when I say the Trump administration is going to do everything they can in a sneaky way, through executive action, through passive action, like pulling out of a case that the Biden administration was enforcing. EMTALA, the emergency abortion law, was passed by Congress, and the administration's job is to enforce it. The Biden administration enforced it as a way to protect women in red states who were in medical emergencies. And we've heard so many of those stories, and you've interviewed so many of those women who've had near-death experiences because they didn't have life-saving abortion care. So what this means is we don't have an administration willing to enforce federal law that was passed by Congress to protect women. And they are saying they'd rather prevent abortion and let women die than enforce the law. This is the kind of action.
Yeah, so that is what's going on today. Beside that, let's talk about what's going on with CNN. Let's hear what Zakari got to say about what's going on with the Trump thing.
Here's my take. There is no area where America's global dominance is more total than higher education. With about 4% of the world's population and 25% of its GDP, America has 72% of the world's 25 top universities by one ranking and 64% by another. But this crucial American competitive advantage is being undermined by the Trump administration's war on colleges. Hat tip to the New York Times' Michelle Goldberg for raising this issue as well. Listen to what J.D. Vance said at the National Conservatism Conference in 2021.
We have to honestly and aggressively attack the universities in this country. The professors are the enemy.
The administration has put those words into action. The most dramatic assault has been financial, a freezing or massive reduction in research grants and loans from the federal government. Some of these efforts are under court review, but the cumulative impact could be billions of dollars in cuts to basic research, much of it disrupting ongoing projects and programs. High-quality research in the United States has emerged in a unique ecosystem. The federal government provides much of the funding through high-quality institutions like the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation, and private foundations and companies account for most of the rest. Professors at universities, both public and private, use these funds to conduct the research. No other country has a system that works as well. What is at risk now is what Holden Thorpe, the editor-in-chief of Science, calls the social contract that the federal government and institutions have had to enable the scientific research enterprise in America in the last 80 years. Take a university like Duke, which ranked 11th in total grants received from the NIH last year. Of its $1.33 billion research budget, $863 million came from Washington, according to the AP. That includes funds for critical research projects on cancer and other diseases, but also support for over 630 PhD students at the medical school. Those projects and students will have to be pared back substantially if the cuts go through. One crucial mechanism to cut funding is through a massive reduction in the overhead or indirect costs that universities get reimbursed for from the federal government. Overhead often makes up to 40 or 50% of a grant. But last month, the NIH ordered that it had to be capped at 15%. This sounds more rational than it is. Universities often divide their costs on science grants into research costs, the salaries of the professors and graduate students, and overhead, the costs of the buildings, labs, energy and utilities and administrative staff. When you are building a complex lab to conduct experiments, the structure.
So beside that, so what else that was crazy in the news today? So there was that. Beside that, there was, bro. I'm tired of Democrats, bro. I'm tired of Democrats. Look what this guy, California governor who
Check
will
this out.
become
I'm going to show
president,
you how I afforded
did
this.
have a sit down with a ex-Trump official, bro.
Okay,
I don't
you
know
ready?
what's wrong with this guy.
$118
That
for
is
car
crazy.
insurance. That's how much
This
I was
guy
paying.
have no chance
Okay,
to become
I picked up the car a few
president.
months ago.
It's a party without a leader, a message, and a plan. And so for Democrats, the familiar voices are filling the vacuum in this second Trump era. Tim Walz takes the blame for their election loss and wants to make up for it by holding town halls in Republican districts. Pete Buttigieg isn't running for the Senate, which paves the way for another run at the White House. Minority Leader Chuck Schumer this week angered liberals when he joined Republicans to avert a shutdown. And California Governor Gavin Newsom angered them more when he gave the microphone to a MAGA architect, Steve Bannon, on his podcast.
I think that's a lesson that we learned after President Trump. And look, you know, we disagree on this, but President Trump won the 2020 election, and we were kind of shattered as a movement when he left Washington, D.C., and we had to go back to basics to say, you know, it can't be somebody else do something. You know, we had to do something. And that's where we went back to really a pure populist movement to go at the grassroots, the precinct strategy, and kind of rebuild ourselves from there.
Well, and I appreciate the notion of agency, that we're not bystanders in the world. It's decisions, not conditions, that determine our fate and future.
As you can see there, Newsom just let it go. He didn't check Bannon's election lie. So are these current Democrats the ones to meet the moment? Well, who knows? But, I listened to that podcast, and it was like one of those things where it's like, that's the only thing you can hear.
Yeah.
I was like, wait.
What?
It was almost like Bannon was expecting the pushback and it never came.
Yep.
And so then he just continued.
Look, this is so Newsom is very transparently running for president. I always thought he was kind of he'll be whatever he needs to be politician. This is way worse. Look, there are many of us that actually, I'm not saying this for sympathy, but basically sacrificed a career taking on people like Steve Bannon. Newsom is trying to build a career by somebody like Steve Bannon. This isn't Jonah Goldberg coming on and talking about the differences between conservative and this is a guy who basically bilked his supporters, by the way, for a fake wall, went to jail for not coming to Congress, said right before January 6th that this was going to be basically, it's going to blow your socks off what happens. Like, this is a bad man. Mm-hmm. And to platform him and think that somehow, I don't know what Newsom thinks he's going to win by this. Democrats are ticked off at him, and there's no Republican that's going to go, you know, that California liberal, I like him. This is nuts.
So yeah, everybody knew what he did was kind of crazy, but here's another crazy thing that happened. People are beginning to scare.
Is this Donald Trump's Fifth Avenue moment? Our friend SC poses that question, that after all that he's done and all that he's survived, is the economy that what may test his strong following, and whether it in fact is Teflon? SE, you say that it might be.
Well, yeah, I know that for years, Trump's detractors, myself included, thought, well, this will be it, right? It started with the Access Hollywood tape. I think a lot of his fans thought, oh, he can't survive this. He did. Then came impeachments. Then came Jan 6th, an insurrection. Then came criminal charges. He's a criminal now. And I think at every turn, his detractors thought, well, this will be the end of him. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of his voters. They don't care about impeachments and insurrections, morality, immorality. They care about their bottom line. And so they care about their bank accounts. They care about their retirement accounts, their home prices, the cost of goods. I think it was never, could he shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and not lose voters? I think it's always been, can he shoot America, the political equivalent? Can he blow up the American economy and not lose voters? That's the test of that theory right now.
I will only quibble with one part of this. I don't think that this is a conversation about Trump's voters. I think it's a conversation about swing voters, about the independents, the people who keep going back and forth, ping-ponging between Democrats and Republicans. The Trump people, actually, he there might not be anything he could do that they would leave him for. But the people in the middle, they don't like their money being messed with.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening right now.
I was thinking about what you were just saying about and I agree. First off, thank you. Great article, by the way.
Thanks.
And I think that you were able to really contextualize what a lot of people thought. We had a lot of outrage. Just like you, I thought that, well, this will be it. This will be it. But to your point, the people in the middle who actually voted for Trump, who thought, okay, maybe he's a businessman. I hear this philosophy all the time. The election was about the economy. He's a businessman. He's a millionaire, soon to be billionaire, or could be. He's going to make the right decisions. And we're seeing in real time. And I'll share a personal story. I go home last week. My grandmother is 95. I always lower her age. She gets upset. She says, don't do that. She's 95 years old. She goes, I am 95 and proud to be 95. And she says to me, she looks directly at me, and I don't know how aware she is of everything, but she is very aware. She goes, I need you to start saving your money because the way that it looks now, and she voted for Trump. She said, we are in trouble, and I made a mistake.
Grandma knows.
95 years old. She lived in the segregated South. She says, this scares me, and I haven't been this scared since I was a kid.
If your house gets its water from a well, you may be experiencing some issues.
So if a grandma is scared of Trump's shenanigan, imagine what else gonna happen. A grandma. So let's hear this debate about ICE.
The grassroots is furious, right?
I know,
Most of the caucus is furious. I never before, my parents were Democrats. I've been a Democrat my entire life. Never before did I say, I should leave this party, because if democracy is at risk and you had no idea what to do and you have no plan, and even now at this moment, you know nothing of what to do and you're capitulating to this is disgusting.
Are you thinking about leaving the Democratic Party? Is that what you're
Yes. Yes, me personally, yes. I'm not an elected official, but I have always voted with the Democrats.
over this issue?
Yeah, over the inability to figure out what to do in the face of fascism and the rise of Trump.
I hear you on that. The inability to have a plan is absolutely a problem, right? But I'm really questioning, what is the plan after the shutdown happens? Because when a shutdown happens, people don't get paid. And this is not exactly an administration that wants to keep the government open. They actually want the thing to be shut down.
Yeah, but here's the thing. And I'm not a Democrat, never was. I was a lifelong Republican and quit the party over Donald Trump because he is someone who doesn't respect the Constitution and is trying to rule like a king. So, but look, I was part of the Tea Party movement. I watched what happened and how Republicans were a resistance opposition party when Democrats ran everything. And watching this happen now as someone who's an independent, that's pro-democracy, that I guess you can say caucuses with the Democrats now, it is very frustrating. When you don't have a leader, there's no unification in a message. It hurts the grassroots and the troops that you need.
Right.
Could you imagine if, I don't know, during World War II, and you saw what was happening with the bombs over London, and then, it was just like, Churchill's just going to say, we're going to capitulate now because, what are we going to do about it? This is not the way you lead. What happens is that the Republicans who are in charge, they have to explain why workers aren't getting paid. They need to explain why they can't run the government. And the Democrats need to say, we were fighting for you. It's not they're in charge. And show that people are being fought for. I'm watching what's happening. And when you have a demoralized base, you're never going to lead an opposition. If you don't have the chutzpah, if you don't have the intestinal fortitude to lead, then get the hell out of the way, Chuck Schumer, and let the people who are willing to fight for their constituents lead the party. Because this is not the way to win.
Okay, she makes a compelling case that this is a leadership issue. Okay?
100%.
And I get that. Chuck.
Look, as the Democrat who gets Democrats elected at this table, with all due respect to all of my friends, there's a lot going on all at the same time. And stay with the old Mexican redneck, and I'll talk slowly for everybody, is that when you're not in charge of jackass, you've got to do something. And to your point, there's a lot of people that feel like you feel about this party right now. And as you go through race after race after race, there was a whole bunch of people that voted for Donald Trump. Democrats first have to realize that and understand why they voted for Donald Trump. And then they should realize, what does it mean to actually fight? Democrats have been in charge for a long time. Some of the same people. I ain't got here to throw hate at nobody, but the anxiety is very real in America right now. And that's why Donald Trump was elected.
So do you think they should have stopped this thing and shut the government down? That is really the question.
As the political consultant here,
it's not Dems shutting the government down.
Absolutely. That's what the Republicans would have said.
Okay, let me
Democrats are
rephrase.
shutting it down. Let's just be clear. That's what
Rephrase, okay? The government would have shut down if there were not enough votes, if Democrats had not cast this vote. And that was a consequence of this.
Right.
Was that an appropriate consequence in order to do something, which is what the
You
base
saw two
system
things
had?
happen at the same time. You saw Schumer said, I'm going to take these bullets for everybody. It may cost me my leadership position.
It should cost him his leadership
And
position.
Democrats feel just like this right here. Throughout the country, we need them to show up in a midterm election. So
I'm
I think
not a Democrat, though. I'm an independent.
That's fine. I'm talking about winning elections.
I know.
Yes.
And in order to win
Oh man, that's crazy. So that was what happened. I'm sorry, I'm gonna try to share another screen of another news platform of PBS News. Let's go.
Tonight on PBS News Weekend, extreme weather across dozens of states home to more than 100 million people unleashed tornadoes and fanned the flames of wildfires
I'll
and
be right
deadly
back.
dust storms. Then how the children of Sudan are bearing the brunt of the violence in that country's brutal civil war. And why a growing number of young adults are swapping college plans for training in skilled trades.
There is a shortage of skilled tradesmen. And I think the younger generation is realizing that they don't necessarily have to go to college to make good money.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by.
In 1995, two friends set out to make wireless coverage accessible to all. With no long-term contracts, nationwide coverage, and 100% U.S.-based customer support. Consumer Cellular. Freedom calls.
The ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. A second round of violent weather is barreling across the central and southern United States after a deadly and destructive Friday night. The storms have spawned violent tornadoes and fanned wildfires and dust storms that have claimed at least 17 lives and destroyed scores of homes. More than 200,000 people are without power across 5 states. Many of the fatalities have been in Missouri, where at least 4 tornadoes touched down. The National Weather Service says there's a heightened threat of tornadoes tonight, stretching from the deep south to the Ohio River Valley. Earlier, I spoke with Matthew Capucci, senior meteorologist at My Radar. He's in Mississippi tracking the storms. I asked him how unusual a multi-day tornado outbreak like this is.
So either of these two different events would in and of themselves be very significant. Last night, we saw roughly 140 tornado warnings in a 24-hour period with numerous fatalities and at least 18 tornado warnings simultaneously. So last night was a big deal. And yet that's the appetizer for what's been happening all day today into the evening hours. We have a level 5 out of 5, a high risk, which is issued only less than 1% of the time. And so it's a top tier event anyway. The verbiage the National Weather Service is using is downright alarming when they say things like volatile, intense, long track tornadoes.
Long track tornadoes, explain that and why they're so dangerous.
So most tornadoes tend to be towards the lower end of the scale, an EF0, 1, or 2 on the 0 through 5 scale. Today, long track, strong to violent tornadoes, we're talking like EF3, EF4 plus, winds of 160 plus miles per hour. And the other thing too, these supercells, the parent rotating storms, will be self-sustained for a long time because the atmosphere is so favorable for that these tornadoes can stay on the ground for 15, 20, 30 minutes, maybe close to an hour in a few instances, leading to very long damage tracks.
What are the ingredients in the atmosphere and the environment that make this all so conducive?
In essence, you need two ingredients. You need cape or juice, how warm and moist is the atmosphere, and you need spin. That spin comes from changing winds with height. Now, it's warm, it's humid. We have Gulf moisture wafting northwards right now, so the atmosphere is very juiced up. But at the same time, the winds at the surface are out of the south or southeast, but aloft, they're more out of the southwest. So any storm that grows tall enough will feel those changing winds and will rotate, in some cases, quite profusely.
This increase in intensity and also the long-lasting, these long-lasting storms, how much of this is due to climate change, or is any of it due to climate change?
It's really not that closely linked to climate change. You know, the spring months every year tend to be a really rough time. We have the insurgences of Gulf moisture and a little bit of leftover cold from winter, and those two seasons kind of battle it out during March, April, May. Realistically, if you're going to get big tornadoes, it'll be over Mississippi or Alabama this time of year. That said, we do know that wintertime events, when the atmosphere is warming a little bit more, tend to be overachieving a bit more thanks to the warming atmosphere. So there's a little bit of a role, but really, it's a time of year.
What's your advice, or what do you say to people who's living in those areas, or maybe under tornado watches or warnings?
In an episode like this, we want people to take action ahead of time. Ordinarily, folks wait until a tornado warning is issued before they seek shelter. But on a day like today, a night like tonight, if people are in a tornado watch, it's probably a good idea to get to a site-built location, someplace with a below-ground shelter, even before any warnings are issued. You never want to be more than 5 minutes away from a shelter on a night like tonight. So that way, if a warning's issued, you can just duck and cover real quick, and you don't have to worry about moving locations. If you have elderly family, friends, loved ones, check in with them. Make sure they have a plan too. It's one of those nights we have to be good neighbors.
And Matthew, to help people out, they hear all these watches, warnings, and that's alerts and that sort of things. What's the difference between a watch and a warning?
So a watch means conditions are favorable for tornadoes to form. Guys, that's the edge of the tornado right there. A warning means that we're seeing one on radar or in person. Something is imminent or occurring. So watch just means, hey, watch out. A warning means take action right now, shelter right now. The warnings are those ones that buzz on your phones. Now, the National Weather Service is calling this a PVS, or a particularly dangerous situation. Those type of watches are only issued about 7% of the time, but you're 3 times more likely to be hit by a violent tornado.
Matthew Capucci in Mississippi, thank you very much and be safe.
Thank you.
In other news, talks between Israel and Hamas on the next phase of the ceasefire remain stalled. Hamas says it will only release American-Israeli hostage Idan Alexander and the bodies of 4 other captives if Israel implements the latest U.S.-backed proposal. Hamas said talks on the second phase of the ceasefire would have to begin the day of the hostage release and last no longer than 50 days. Israel would also have to resume the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. This as Israeli airstrikes killed 9 people in northern Gaza. A local watchdog group said the dead included 3 Palestinian journalists. U.S. forces carried out a series of strikes on Yemen's capital Sana'a in an effort to stop Houthi rebel attacks on commercial vessels and U.S. warships in the Red Sea. President Trump warned that if the attacks in the busy maritime corridor don't stop, hell will rain down upon you like nothing you have ever seen before. Mr. Trump also warned Iran to stop supporting the group. A Houthi spokesman said at least 9 civilians were killed and 9 others injured. Earlier this week, the Houthis said they would resume attacks on Israeli ships in response to Israel's blockade of Gaza, but no attacks have been reported. In a highly unusual move, the United States has expelled South Africa's ambassador. In a post on X, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool is a race-baiting politician who hates America. The ambassador had criticized the Trump administration in a webinar for a South African think tank. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said he wants to repair the relationship and maintain a strong tie with the United States. This is the latest in the escalating dispute between the Trump administration and South Africa. Last month, President Trump signed an executive order offering white South Africans a rapid pathway to U.S. citizenship, saying they're being discriminated against. Earlier, Mr. Trump cut off aid to South Africa. Journalists at the federally funded news outlet Voice of America have been put on paid administrative leave. In an email Saturday, staff was also told they must be available to return to work on 1 day's notice. The agency that runs Voice of America was among those dismantled under an executive order President Trump signed on Friday. VOA was created in 1942 to counter Nazi propaganda. During the Cold War, it sought to bring news to people behind the Iron Curtain. Today, it broadcasts in more than 40 languages to a global audience of 427 million people. And 2 stranded astronauts are one step closer to coming home. A new crew is heading to the International Space Station aboard a rocket that NASA and SpaceX launched last night. They'll replace astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams, whose 1-week mission stretched into 9 months when technical issues prevented their return to Earth. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, how children are being victimized in Sudan's brutal civil war, and why many from Generation Z are ditching college for training in skilled trades.
This is PBS News Weekend from the David M. Rubenstein studio at WETA in Washington, home of the PBS NewsHour, weeknights on PBS.
This week, the head of the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, told global leaders Sudan's humanitarian crisis is the world's biggest and most devastating. A new UNICEF report says 30 million people are in need of humanitarian aid, more than half of them children. Many of them face threats of violence and sexual assault on a daily basis. The report also says that in fewer than 2 years of conflict, the number of people at risk of gender-based violence has more than tripled to more than 12 million people, or 25% of the population. Ali Rogan spoke with UNICEF spokesperson Tess Ingram, who recently traveled to Sudan.
Thank you so much for joining us. Tess, what are the major findings from this report?
This report tells us that we're facing a very serious situation in Sudan with sexual violence. It is being used as a weapon of war to instill fear in communities. The data that we got from service providers in Sudan shows that there have been 221 cases of rape perpetrated against children since the beginning of 2024. And if that alone isn't shocking, it tells us that there are really young children in that cohort, as young as 1 year old, and the cases of rape are being perpetrated right across the country. So this is not an isolated incident. It is widespread terror being waged across Sudan.
To what extent is the civil war fueling this sexual violence?
We know that sexual violence existed, including being perpetrated against children in Sudan before this conflict. But we've seen it resurge again, and we've seen it happen in a number of different scenarios of armed men as they come into a city, taking young girls from their families and holding them against their will. We've seen families fleeing that fear of that violence and death, only to find themselves apprehended or put in harm's way. And again, when people get to places that they think are safe, they are not safe. The violence follows them. And that is consistent in many locations across the country of Sudan right until today.
We have a soundbite from a victim that you interviewed on the ground. We're calling her Omnia, and she talked to you about what she witnessed while she was abducted and held and mistreated by armed groups. That included witnessing acts of sexual violence. Take a listen.
I endured this suffering and torment for 19 days. Throughout the 19 days, there were daily rapes. Every day there were rapes. Every day there was a crime. During those 19 days, I lived in hell. These people are not human beings. They subjected us to insults, humiliation, fear, terror, and starvation.
Is that similar to other stories that you've heard throughout the region?
I spent 2 weeks in Sudan, spending time with these incredibly brave survivors. I think it's important for us to understand the culture in Sudan blames the survivor and not the perpetrator for the sexual violence. And so they live with a tremendous amount of social stigma and fear of retribution. So it's incredibly brave for these survivors to speak. And yes, I interviewed dozens over 2 weeks, hearing their stories about their experiences. But the consistent part was, in most cases, these are children, they are young women who were trying to survive an awful, violent conflict only to be raped, and in many cases physically beaten, threatened. They had loved ones killed in front of them. The youngest survivor I interviewed was 5 years old. This should not happen to anybody, let alone to children in such a vulnerable position.
What are the impacts on the wider society? You know, the relatives, family members of the victims, and is this happening in places that people fleeing the violence are seeking safety and shelter?
People in Sudan now live in fear of this happening to them and to their families. And so what it has done is it creates a motivation to run and to leave when conflict descends on people's cities. It causes massive displacement alongside the other challenges that the conflict brings, like malnutrition and like bombardments. But sexual violence is also causing people to be displaced. Men, women, children. Frontline workers I spoke to talked about cases within the communities where these displaced people are living. Maybe it's dark, they have to make a long walk to a water point. In those sorts of situations, they're again vulnerable to sexual violence.
How is UNICEF helping the survivors of these assaults?
We're working across Sudan to bring the supplies and services that survivors need. But more than that, we're trying to prevent this from happening. We're doing advocacy with the parties to the conflict to remind them of their obligations under international humanitarian law to protect children. We're also working on preventative methods such as training sessions and awareness sessions for frontline workers and for young girls. We're also providing cash assistance to try and help those families when they flee get to places that are safer. And if that fails and we aren't able to prevent the rape, then we are providing supplies and services like mental health support, like medical kits for hospitals, and the other life-saving equipment that people need.
Tess Ingram with an important look at what's happening on the ground in Sudan. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
As the average cost of college in the United States soars, more young people are being drawn to skilled trades. It's part of a career rethink among Gen Z, who've been called the tool belt generation. Here's special correspondent Christopher Booker.
There's 7 different types of harnesses, right? So you're going to help him dress out.
The task is simple enough. Put on a safety harness, secure the ladder, and climb up.
Identify three items that you see up there.
This exercise is all part of an Introduction to Construction course at Westchester Community College. And for the students, it's a first step toward a career in the skilled trades. The certificate they get from completing this class opens the door to any trade they may be interested in.
You've got to start somewhere. And this program right here is the kind of thing that will get your foot in the door. They can build upon this and get into more specific training, plumbing, electrical, HVAC. How did you guys make out at the career fair?
Thomas Stewart, a retired steam fitter and member of New York's Local 21 Plumbers and Steam Fitters, has been an adjunct instructor with Westchester Community College for the past 7 years. Since COVID, he says the number of students walking into his course has increased substantially. And the rise is happening nationwide. According to the National Student Clearinghouse, the number of students in vocational-focused community college has risen by nearly 16% since 2020.
Somehow word must have gotten out, and I've known this for years, that there is a shortage of skilled tradesmen. And I think the younger generation is realizing that they don't necessarily have to go to college to make good money. Skilled tradesmen in this country can make 6 figures. I'm taking it nice and easy.
Through Local 21, Stewart receives health care and retirement benefits. In its effort to keep its rosters filled, Local 21 offers apprenticeship programs to train young people in everything to do with pipes, from plumbing to sprinklers.
And when they're an apprentice, that's where you get to a scenario where you actually will be working and studying.
Earn as you learn. We like to say it like that because you can work your 8-hour shift during the day, and usually it's 2, sometimes 3 nights a week. You'll have to go to school.
When someone enters the apprenticeship program, do they receive benefits as well? Is that
Absolutely, right from the start?
So healthcare,
Yeah,
in the pension.
yeah.
Well, the stories vary from student to student. Some of the young people who come through Stewart's classroom are not coming right from high school.
Right after high school, I went into college at Penn State. I spent about 2 years there. I was studying data science and astrophysics. But eventually I dropped out during the pandemic.
After a bit of time at home, Carson Schrock found an entry-level position as a machinist.
Originally, they had me just doing some odd jobs around the shop, trying to find what my role would be. And eventually I got moved on to this 9-axis CNC machine.
An advanced manufacturing process, computer numeric control, or CNC, allows a machinist to create complex and complicated parts. Schrock spent the last year with Westchester Community College, working to earn a roster of CNC certifications.
So when you were in high school, was pursuit of a trade at all part of the conversation?
Not really, no. It was mostly about like what field of computer programming I would be in. Data science was close to what I wanted to do with the programming and making things, but I wanted to do something with my hands, something that left me with like a physical thing.
While Schrock came to the trades after 2 years in college, Stewart says the renewed interest has made its way to high school as well.
So in our department, it was a concerted effort.
Sarah Hall is an assistant principal of White Plains High School in White Plains, New York.
We've been bringing in local tradesmen. We had Local 3 in, we had our sheet metal workers in. We're trying to bring them in so we as adults can learn more about the trades so that we can better inform our kids on what their options are.
Has the school started to offer more by way of what would be historically called vocational technology classes?
Yeah, so we're going to start demolition on our 75 acres, and we're building a career and technical building.
Wow, so you guys are really all in.
So we're excited, yes, yes.
What about the conversation with parents? Has that changed?
Parents are open, but there are times where we have to have tough conversations with those parents and say, you know what, this might not be the path that you thought you would want for your child, but they're going to be successful no matter what they do. We just need to support them in getting there. But I do think that parents' perspective is going to start changing as society changes, right? I think that's important about having these conversations is we need to demystify the trades.
In 2023, Hall says 11% of White Plains graduates either went into the military or into a trade. Last year, it was 13%.
You know, your top tier college is over 90 grand a year. Kids are starting to look at that. And society says you have to go to college to be successful. What we're trying to say is that's not always 100% accurate. Having a college degree does help you financially. However, money doesn't equal happiness.
With reports that the U.S. construction industry alone will need to attract over 450,000 workers to meet industry demand this year, many in Gen Z may well be able to find out if Harris is correct. For PBS News Weekend in Westchester, New York, I'm Christopher Booker.
That's another way.
Now online, 2.5 years after becoming the first state to ban abortion after Roe v. Wade was struck down, Missouri abortion clinics are reopening their doors. All that and more is on our website, pbs.org/newshour. And that is PBS News Weekend for this Saturday. Tomorrow, we'll look at the DOGE layoffs at the FAA and what they could mean for aviation safety. I'm John Yang. For all of my colleagues, thanks for joining us. See you tomorrow.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS News Weekend. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.
Só beijinho lá na mão. Não vou meter o macho na vida. Ele que eu não te dá nada. Só de dernièrement, vou te dar uma palavra.
Oui, et comme ça, vous le dites, et ça, il est
Bien ça, vous m'avez fait là, mais comme vous fait ouvert. Oui, parce que je ne on a les bateaux. Parce que je ne
bon Jackson, il y a doué. Mais là, ça vous fait pas de valeur. Après, vous là-haut. Allez. Non, mais allez.
Jesse.
Oh man.